Hello, my name is Liz McCarthy, and I'm visiting you guys from Summer in the City, and we're going to make a birdhouse today. So when we are making birdhouses, we're using the clay material because it's very porous, it's from the earth, and so we're using this to make a nice threads. So in order to start getting set up to make your birdhouse out of clay, you need a bunch of different tools that you can find around your house. I'm going to show you some of those tools. I have a fork here, I have a knife and a spoon. You might be familiar with these as a cutlery in your cabinet. I have a ruler so that we can measure dimensions for your birdhouse. The summer camp has included a sheet that will give you a link to a bunch of different birdhouses that you can kind of think about. As we're going, I am going to be making a birdhouse for a house wren, so I have the dimensions so you can kind of take a look at different birdhouses that you might want to build. My house is going to be 4 inches by 4 inches, and the height is going to be 6 inches. And we'll go back over that in a moment. But more tools you might need. I have a wire that will help me for cutting, and I have like a little card here that's going to help me for smoothing. I have just like a little swizzle stick here. I have a toothbrush. Toothbrush is good for smoothing. And then I also have a spray bottle. You don't need a spray bottle, but sometimes it helps if your clay is a little bit wet as you're moving. You can also use a cardboard box for working on the surface. I have a nice canvas covered table that I use in my studio, but you can use a cardboard box to work on, or you could even use a board like this. So as we're working, we sometimes like to work on a surface and kind of keep our projects on the surface. Especially in the beginning, we'll just be working in parts, and then we'll put it together and be working on it. The other thing we have is water. So when you're working with clay, you want to be very careful to not use too much water because you can suddenly go from having a nice solid ball to having a muddy mess. So keep that in mind as you're working. We like to think about clay as coming from the earth. You can harvest it, right, and work with your hands, and so it's very natural. But the clay that we're using here at the Narware Workshop Studio, all the different minerals are taken from different places. That goes to a factory in Pennsylvania, and then it creates this clay. So this is actually not so natural. It's a bunch of different minerals that are put together to make a really nice, perfect clay. So you guys are going to have a really nice earthenware clay that you get to work with at your homes. But clay itself is a very natural material. And so when we're working with it, we're thinking about clay is made up of these series of platelets that look like this. And so as we're working with the material, we're thinking about sliding those platelets through our fingers. We're also thinking about how it's drying and heating. And so you might get cracking. So we want to be pressing those platelets and making sure that they're nice and secure as we're working with the material. The other thing about clay is that we have this phenomenon called plasticity. So you can see here that the material holds my touch. And so it happens because of an electrostatic reaction that happens between those platelets. So we have a lot of science that's happening here with our clay material as we're working. So the first thing that I want to do when I get my clay material is I want to start kind of mixing it up and stimulate that electrostatic reaction. So I'm going to take the material and I'm just going to kind of start squishing it in my hands. If your clay is feeling really hard and it feels too tough, you can take it and you can kind of make like indentions like this. I'm grabbing a little water and then I'm going to throw that in there, fold it up. But you can see this is the sort of danger of the materials that you can start getting really squishy and wet really fast. So you want to be careful of not using too much water, right? We want our material to be nice and firm. So I'm going to start squishing up my ball. And so I grabbed about a handful of clay to begin with. So we're going to be doing this workshop in a few different parts. So we're going to be kind of working through those different parts. There might be moments when you need to stop and let your piece dry out from the fan, or you can even cover it with some plastic like this, or even a grocery bag, and let it sit under plastic for a day if you want to come back to it the next day and work. So as we are making our birdhouse, we're going to be working in different parts. So the first part of making our birdhouse is we're going to make individual pinch pots that we'll later put together. So in order to do that, I'm going to take my clay material. You guys probably are going to get a big chunk. You can use this as a wire tool or just like a piece of floss or any sort of wire or string. And you can take your clay material like this and cut off a piece. So you can see I have a nice chunk. Probably you'll want kind of like a nice fistful, maybe 2 fistfuls of clay for your first pinch pot. And as we're going, we're always thinking about what are the dimensions of our pinch pot and how is that going to fit our bird. So I have this ruler here so that I can keep measuring that as I go. You can see this pinch pot this birdhouse is about 6 inches and it is about 4 by 4. And then its hole is about 1 1/4. So this is right around the dimensions that we want for our house wren. We are making a pinch pot house for a house wren bird. So we're going to take that ball of clay and start making our pinch pot. So I'm going to do that. I'm taking my ball of clay and I'm taking my thumb. I'm just going to stick it in there, right? So I have a nice round thumb. So I'm not going all the way to the end. I have about 1/2 inch at the bottom. Now I'm going to take that material and I'm just going to start to pinch. So I'm going to take it and I'm thinking about those platelets that we were talking about. I'm sliding those platelets toward me. So I'm pinching, and as you're pinching, you might start to kind of create this sort of cone shape here. So I'm going to go a little bit faster. So as you're working, you want to kind of leave things nice and thick. The other reason you want to leave it nice and thick is that the bird needs nice insulation in its home, right? So that it can have a nice secure home. So you can leave things a little bit thick. You don't want them too thick though. So about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch is a good measurement. So that's about this thick to about this thick. So you can see we're starting to kind of thin out our walls. Pinching that material. And if you feel like your piece is starting to kind of fall apart, that's totally fine. You can always squish it back together and then start anew. So I'm pinching, pinching. So now I have something that's starting to look like this, right? Some sort of cone. So now I can take that. I'm going to start kind of just tapping it on the table. So I'm tapping it. I'm using the table to shape my piece. I can even use my hands. I'm using my hands and I'm going to kind of push them together. And this is compressing those platelets together. So we're always thinking about those platelets and we're compressing those platelets together. And I can go back in with my thumb and kind of compress by sort of moving my thumb over the surface. Smoothing. So now I'm starting to get my pinch pot form. So at this point, we want to start thinking about what are the dimensions. So this is about 4 inches, but I need to make my piece a little bit bigger because clay is going to shrink about 10%. So this is a lot of math, but you can kind of estimate. So probably if I want it to be 4 inches, then I should maybe make my piece about 4.5 big. So I'm going to start pinching here a little bit more, kind of flattening out and get some surface. I can even push my walls down. You can even use your ruler as you're going to kind of take that and slap the sides. So this is called paddling. So that ruler can measure, but it can also become a tool. So I'm pushing down here a little bit more and remembering that I don't want it to get too thin. The other thing that I want to keep in mind is that when my bird is inside of the house, we want the bird to have some things to hold on to, right? Because it has little claws and it kind of needs to stand and kind of anchor itself in its home. So we can take our piece, and I'm going to take my fork tool and just kind of give it a little bit of roughage. So just kind of scrape that inside a little bit. So I'm just scraping my piece here on the inside so that the bird has something to hold onto. I can also hold and support my pinch pot, because sometimes if I'm pushing too hard, it might hurt my and move it over like that. So if I do that, I can kind of just lightly go back in. And remember, if the piece starts to fall apart, that's okay. Just squish it back together, add a little bit of water, squish it around, and start over. So there is the first piece of my pinch pot. Now I'm going to make my second pinch pot. So I'm taking a big handful of clay again, usually about 2 hands, and I have to think about the dimensions of my other pinch pot as I'm making this pinch pot. So you can kind of take that, we're going to hit that against the table, right, because we're compacting those platelets. So now I'm going to take this piece and again stick my thumb in there so I have a nice round thumb, and then start pinching out my piece. So just pinching the edges, and I'm sort of pulling the clay towards me. Use both hands as I'm going. And we don't have to worry about smoothing until later. Right now we're just trying to make our shapes. We can worry about all the smoothing stuff later. So I'm pinching my piece. And again, I'm starting to kind of almost get like this cone shape here. That's fine. But I could also kind of keep some of that cone shape. You can also see I'm starting to think about the diameter of my piece. And so I want to start kind of putting it on top here and lining it up. So that's looking pretty good, but now I can shape the bottom half. It's also good to leave this edge a little bit thick, because we're going to have to use this edge to attach to this edge as we're going. So I can go in and do some more shaping. So I just keep pinching, pinching, pinching. Kind of turn it over too. I could even hit it this way. And again, we can use that paddle to come in. Do a little shaping. Could roll it on the table even. And that will help give us some shaping there. So shaping that piece. If I need to flatten this edge a little bit, I can just take it and tap it on the table. Using the table is a great tool. You can always kind of just use that as a flat surface and pound our pieces against. Okay, so now I'm lining my pieces up. Then I'm going to just do a little quick measurement. So this is at about 5 inches. So eventually I want my piece to be at about 6 inches. So we're going to make one more pinch pot that we'll be able to add on top here. So I'm going to put that to the side and start on my next one. Okay, so we now have 2 pinch pots. So now we're going to make our third additional pinch pot. You don't need as much clay for this, so maybe kind of a smaller fistful here. I'm going to take that, squish it up. Now you all are experts at making pinch pots. So we can just jump right in. Take that, stick your thumb in, and start pinching. So I'm just pinching that out as usual. Tap, tap, tap. And as you're going, if some of these sort of seem to work in different positions better, you can kind of use your pieces and rearrange them, right? Depending on how you want your piece to be shaped. So what I'm imagining here is that this piece is going to eventually go on top of this piece. So look something like this once I start stacking it like that. So I'm taking that, starting to imagine pinch pot. Looks good. So at this point, our pieces are pretty malleable and soft, right? So it'll be a little bit harder to connect them because they're so soft. We can put them in front of the fan for a minute and let them dry out, or you can cover them and come back to this project another day. You want to be really, really careful of not letting your pieces dry out. If they dry out, then it's going to be, you're going to have to start over and it's not going to work. So you want to take your plastic and you want to make sure that you're completely wrapping everything up. Completely wrap it so it stays nice and wet. So you can leave it for up to a week, but you want to make sure that it's staying wet. Maybe check it occasionally and make sure that it's still soft and malleable. If it does completely dry out, you can crush it up, re-wet it, and turn it back into clay. So now I'm kind of piecing these up and wrap them up in plastic. Or if you want to keep working, you can stick in front of the fan for about 20 minutes and then pull it back out and start working. Alright, so I've been letting my pieces dry out and now they're a little bit more firm so I can start to put them together. So I want them to be a little bit more firm as they're drying out so that they can hold their shape a little bit better. So I have my form set up here. I'm going to take it apart. So in order to put two pieces of clay together, I have to do some scoring. So I'm going to just show you, if you try to put two pieces of clay together without doing any scoring, do you see how they don't want to stick together? So in order to make these two pieces stick, I need to take either a fork, or I have a little nail here, and you can take that, we're going to start scoring the surface. So what I'm doing when I'm scoring is I'm taking those platelets and I'm making them kind of go in lots of different directions like that, sort of like Velcro. And then I'm going to use a little bit of water. I can use my sponge at this point, sort of dab that on there. And then I can take those two pieces and then stick them together. And you can see how much better that hold is. So I'm pulling them apart. It takes a lot of effort to pull them apart. So I'm going to do that with these pieces. So I'm going to take my edge here. So these two pieces are going to connect here and here. So I need to take my fork and just start scoring the surface. And as I'm going, sometimes I use my hand to support it so I'm not squishing it down. I'm always using my hand on the other side to support it. I'm right-handed, so I use my left hand as a support hand and my right hand to do my scoring. So now I'm tearing up that edge, right? So I'm going to show you a bad example of scoring. So this is maybe not the best scoring, right? So it's just really kind of shallow. You really want to take it and sort of tear up that edge. It's too light. I really need to kind of take that fork and tear up those platelets so that they're all mixed up and will create a better bond. So now I'm going to take my other piece and just do the same thing to that edge. Taking that fork, turning it around, scoring that edge. As I'm in here, I'm just going to score that inside a little bit too, just so that the birds hold on to. I'm going to line them up just to make sure that it fits. Take my hands, tap it a little bit, so that looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to take those two parts and take some water and start applying that lightly to the edge. So you want to be really, really careful with the water, because water can suddenly make everything turn into a sloppy mess. So you can see that this is starting to kind of get really, really muddy. I can't hold on to it. So you want to just take a little bit of water, even take your sponge, put it in the water and squeeze out everything. Maybe dab a little bit in there. Just dab that in, dab. You can even take your finger, dab a little bit of water, and do it that way. So just a little bit of water goes a long way. So I've got that wet, not too wet. Now I'm going to take that and start pushing those together. So I want to be really careful. At this point I want my pieces to start connecting, but I don't want to push too hard onto my piece, otherwise it's going to collapse everything. And so now I want to start marrying those seams here. So I have this seam So I want to start blending this together. So one thing that I can do is I can take my fork and I can start to blend those platelets with the fork. So this is taking those platelets, it's pushing them into each other so they're starting to blend into the same form. So now I've blended all my platelets. Now we can go back to some smoothing. So this technique is called knitting. I'm going to take my thumb or even my fingers, and I'm going to hold it with my hands, and I'm just taking that thumb and holding that over the edge. It might concave a little bit, you can kind of push it out a little bit. I'm starting to blend with my thumb. So now I've blended everything around. It doesn't look super beautiful yet, but we're going to start kind of making this a little bit nicer. One thing I can do is start to kind of tap it against the table again, because I've made it entirely enclosed form. And so now all the air is being held on the inside, and that air can kind of help to secure the shape. Now here's my initial form. I'm going to measure it, and right now I am about 5 inches. So I want my piece to be a little bit taller so it will fit our house front, right? So I'm going to start adding this next piece. Now we're going to put this piece on here. So I'm putting this on here, and I can start kind of visually lining up go, because now I'm going to need to cut a hole to attach this piece. So taking that off, and sometimes even just putting this on there will make a little bit of an impression. So check and see where that impression is. So you can use a nail for this, or you can use a knife, and just take that and start to slice it. And you might feel some of that air releasing as you're cutting. You want to be careful that you're not squishing everything down. Just kind of cutting it. At some point, it might be helpful to just pull it off. So now I have a nice cavity here. You can pull that up a little bit and do a little bit of shaping. If I need to flatten it, I can turn it over, flatten the edge where it needs to connect to. So now I have these 2 pieces that are ready to start connecting. What do I need to do? Scoring. So I'm going to take that fork, score that edge. Score this edge. Then taking my sponge, just a little bit of water, not too much water, put it in there, lining that edge. Then place them on top of each other. And you can see I have sort of an overhanging edge here. That's the material that I can use to start blending in here. So I'm taking that work tool again, just going in. And you can see I left that nice thickness earlier so that I can use the thickness of the clay to start pushing into the other clay. It's good to not get too thin, otherwise your pieces will start falling apart. So I'm going to start doing my knitting technique again. So knitting that all back in. And now I'm pushing down so I have more stability down here. And I can even, if I have all this extra stuff, I can just take my finger and pull it off. You can even start bringing your card in. So if your parents have like a gift card or you have a student ID, you can use that. Take that and just start pulling off some of that extra. Don't worry about smoothing at this point. We're going to do that at the very end. So it can still kind of look like you're kind of knocking your guy. So now I've started to blend everything together. So let's check out our dimensions. So I'm going in, and this is about 6 inches. That's good, that's where we want to be. And so I can start, now that I have this all complete, I can start to even do a little bit more shaping. So I'm taking it, all that air is trapped in, so it's like a balloon, so I can shape around the air that's inside. Circle the bottom, and push it out. The other thing that we want to think about in this phase is where your birdhouse is going to end up. If you think you're going to mount it against a tree, you can even think about making a more flat back. And we're going to start thinking about where those holes are going to go. So I do want to think about my dimensions. So this says that my house wren wants my piece to be about 4 inches by 4 inches. So I'm going to measure the bottom here. This is about 4 1/4, and this is about 4 1/4. So that's good. A nice wide space, and then I have that for about 6-ish inches. So I'm starting to make the dimensions for our bird friend. I can also start strategizing where I'm going to start putting the holes for mounting. So you can see some of these have holes, or have these attached pieces here so that they can hang. You can also attach pieces on the side so that you can do wire and secure it to the tree that way, or you can even drill in screws to screw it into the tree or your house inside of the house. We've done a lot of smoothing, but you might notice that we have still some. Don't worry about that. If you're obsessed with smoothing, you can always go back and do it. You can take, when it's totally dry, tiny bit of water. The other nice thing is that birds are not too picky about aesthetic piece. In fact, they like things rough. A little bit rough there for birds. So now we need to start doing our final touches to our piece. So to do my hole, I'm looking at my dimensions, and this says that my bird likes to have a hole about 4 to 6 inches above the floor. So our piece is only about 6 inches, so probably 4 inches from the piece. So I'm going to take my ruler here, about 4 1/2 right there. Collar here. This is 4 1/2. So now I can make my hole. I can use it in a couple different ways. One way is I can just take my finger and stick it in there, like that. Or we can take a knife and start to hollow that out. So once I've made my hole, I'm going to start measuring that hole. So my bird wants it to be about 1 small bird. We're going to make it a little bit larger because we want it to have in the shrink some. And when I say kiln, what I'm talking about is the oven where this is going to go and heat up afterwards and start to cook the stone. We're heating these to 1,860 degrees. It's going to be like molten lava. So I'm going to start pulling that out. You might have seen some birdhouses have these attached to them. Sometimes that actually is not so great because the predators that want to get in here can use those like squirrels to hold on to those or sit on those to get in. You don't want to give the predators a very good entrance, so I'm not going to add this to our birdhouse. But I am going to start to pinch my piece so that it has some fluidity through here. And you can think think about how your bird is going to exert and exit. You want to kind of pinch the edge, but it has in a nice area. Pinch that out, going into some smoothing. Inside too, and you can see the inside is pretty crazy. It's got lots of gumballs in some areas. That's good. The bird likes to have all this extra stuff in there so that it can hold on to that and use those different parts that exist in its body. So we want to leave that and not smooth that out too much. So pulling that out. And then I'm going to measure. This is about 1.5 to 6 inches. Now I'm going to decide how do I want to add my mounts. So I could have it suspended like this, or I could add areas to the side. So now I can start to take pieces, additional pieces. Just need a little bit to squish up in my hands. Just squish that up like that. Roll it a little bit. Now I'm starting to kind of make that. So I'm tapping on the surface so that I have these nice areas that I'm going to attach. So for my birdhouse, I think that I'm going to put stuff on the sides so that I can run wire. I'm starting to line this up here. Even put it this way and have wire. So I'm lining that up. Another one. Here. Arms. So in order to attach these, now I have to do my scoring. So as I was placing these on here, it's making a nice little indentation there. So I know that I can go back to the scoring. Then I'm going to score this edge. And then taking a little bit of water. Now you can see I also have kind of an ugly rough area. Take a swizzle stick, start to blend that. Take a tool, just use the edge of that in. I want to make sure that these loops are really stuck on there. So use the finger to blend. And if they look a little bit ugly, you can pick it up and over to there. So now we're starting to have these supports for suspending our piece. You can also think about ventilation, so you might want to add a couple holes in addition. It's just extra ventilation so that there's air and pockets that are going into the birdhouse, right? You don't want to put it on top because otherwise water will get in. Use your nail or some other pointy tool and sort of stick in some holes. And that just gives the bird air inside its space. So, there's my finished piece. If I want to do extra smoothing, I can always let it dry a little bit more and then go back later. The other thing that I can do, this one has a sort of nice textured rough surface. Add extra textured rough surface too, or other designs by kind of taking this tool even take a pen and write words. So now you have your birdhouse. Now that you have this birdhouse, Summer in the City is going to pick these up, or you're going to drop them off. We're going to come over here in our workshop. We're going to go into our kiln, get really hot, and turn into a stone. So we're going to heat them to 1,860 degrees, and those platelets are going to start to fuse together. So when you get them back, they'll be a little bit more red color, it'll be nice and hard. And then you can mount them anywhere in your directions that I have provided on your sheet. It should say where you should mount your pieces. So sometimes birds want them 14 feet up in the air, 18 feet. So when you're mounting your birdhouse outside, just keep that in mind. Thank you so much for joining me in this workshop, and I hope you make an awesome little birdhouse and have fun.